A vanished collar, a phantom trail, murder close behind. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love reading them. Let's unravel Wolfe's collar of secrets. You'd think by now I'd be used to strange things turning up at the brownstone, letters edged in black, housemaids with tears the size of walnuts, clients who smelled like a lawyer's desk drawer, and once, memorably, a man who insisted his dead aunt's parrot was giving investment tips from beyond the grave. But that Tuesday evening brought a fresh addition to the parade of curiosities. A woman clutching a velvet-lined case as if it contained the crown jewels of Europe. Except it didn't. It contained a dog collar. I'd like to say it was an ordinary one, leather strap, brass buckle, maybe a silver nameplate. But this particular collar could have been auditioning for the Met. Black velvet studded with seed pearls, a clasp that looked like it had wandered out of Tiffany's, and an odor faintly of lilac, as though the hound in question spent his days lounging in a perfumer's back room. The woman, who had the kind of nerves you usually see in a tightrope walker, kept her gloved fingers pressed to the case as if it might vanish if she blinked. I ushered her into the office and gave Wolfe the usual warning look. He was in his chair, as he always was, looking like the bust of a Roman emperor who'd had a run-in with an overgenerous caterer. He didn't so much as twitch when I said, "Visitor, boss. Female." "Brings gifts, pfui," he said, which is his way of saying everything from welcome, "Do sit down," to "Why did you interrupt me in the middle of the Iliad?" She introduced herself as Mrs. Clara Biltmore, widow of a banker and owner of a Pekingese with a name too complicated to remember on short notice. The story was this. The dog collar, heirloom of the Biltmore family, had vanished from her dressing table a week ago, only to reappear 2 nights later, placed neatly back where it had been, clasp fastened, pearls shining. No note, no break-in signs, no ransom demands. Just gone and back again like the world's most confused burglar. Now, if you ask me, anyone who makes a fuss about a dog collar deserves at least a week's probation in a padded room. But Mrs. Biltmore had that certain tone of someone whose nerves had been slowly strung tighter by silk threads and who, at the breaking point, would either scream or faint. Wolfe, of course, regarded her as he would a moth that had wandered too close to his orchids. "And what?" he asked finally, his lips barely moving. "Do you wish of me?" Her eyes darted from me back to him. I don't know. My husband's sister insists someone is playing a cruel trick, but I feel it is more than that. Something malicious. I need to know who touched it, who entered my home, and why I caught Wolfe's look, half irritation, half the faint spark he gets when something twitches his brain cells. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just shut his eyes for a beat too long, which I've learned means, "Archie, she's staying long enough to annoy me, so bring beer." That's how it began. A dog collar, a trembling widow, and Wolfe's silence heavy enough to fill the room. Mrs. Clara Biltmore sat in the red leather chair like a queen on half rations, hands folded over that velvet case, eyes darting from Wolfe to me and back again as though she hadn't quite decided which one of us was less likely to laugh at her. Wolfe didn't move, didn't blink, didn't so much as twitch an eyebrow. That was his way of letting the air in the room do the work. I've seen Navy men under cross-examination sweat less than she did while waiting for him to speak. The silence got thick enough that I figured it was time for a Goodwin brand rescue mission. I leaned against the edge of my desk, not too close, not too far. "Let me get this straight, Mrs. Biltmore. You're saying someone broke into your place, took the collar, kept it for a couple days, and then waltzed it back in and left it like a thank-you note?" Her throat worked like she was swallowing more than air. "That's exactly it, Mr. Goodwin." My maid, Edna, swore she locked the dressing-room windows. The doors were secured. Nothing else in the room was disturbed. No footprints, no fingerprints. And then, 2 nights later, it was back, resting exactly where I keep it, as though... She stopped herself, pressed her lips tight. "As though what?" I prompted. "As though someone wished me to know they could touch my things whenever they pleased," she said, voice sharper than it had been since she'd sat down. That earned the faintest grunt from Wolfe, which is his equivalent of clapping hands and shouting bravo. He finally cracked open his eyes. "A violation, then. Not theft, not ransom. A trespass of the psyche." Unpleasant. You'd think that might have reassured her, hearing the great man speak, but if anything, her shoulders stiffened further. I could see now she was wound tight, brittle as glass, and if Wolfe pushed too hard, we'd be mopping her off the rug. I decided to keep the conversation in neutral. "Any enemies in particular, Mrs. Biltmore?" I asked. "I'm not talking about the kind who honk at you on Madison Avenue. Someone who'd care enough to fiddle with a dog's jewelry." Her lips trembled around a name she didn't quite let out. "My husband's sister, Lydia. She never liked me, but she wouldn't. No, she couldn't." She glanced down at the velvet case, as though afraid Lydia might come leaping out of it. "Anyone else?" She drew in a long, unsteady breath. "There's Dr. Conrad Veen, who treated my husband in his last illness. He disapproved of me, I always felt. And Miles Fenton, my husband's former partner at the bank, and—" Her voice trailed away again. Wolfe's eyes were closed once more, but I could tell he was cataloguing each name, alphabetizing them in his mental filing cabinet. He let her stew in the quiet for another long minute, then finally said, "Archie." I knew that tone. It was the tone that meant, "Fetch your notebook and sharpen your wits, for though I shall not move, you must." "Right here," I said, already flipping open the pad I keep handy for such occasions. "Mrs. Biltmore, you will prepare for Mr. Goodwin a list, every individual who has had access to your household in the past fortnight. Servants, relations, acquaintances. Be precise. Times, dates, their purposes. Archie will collect it tomorrow morning at 10. She stiffened as though he'd ordered her to produce a live elephant. "Tomorrow? But surely you will come to the house yourself." "No." Wolfe's voice landed like a gavel. "I do not leave this house. Mr. Goodwin does the legwork. You may rely on his diligence." I gave her my most reassuring grin, the one that says, "Don't worry, lady. I'll handle the heavy lifting while he handles the genius." She didn't quite manage to smile back, but some of the stiffness left her posture. Wolfe waved a finger faintly, like dismissing a waiter. "That is all, madam. Fritz will see you out. If there's a man alive who can usher a rattled widow into the night with more dignity than Fritz Brenner, I haven't met him." He appeared like a benevolent spirit, guided her toward the hall, and left behind the faint aroma of whatever miracle he was working in the kitchen. When the door clicked shut, I turned to Wolfe. "So what's the verdict?" "Are we in the business of finding lost dog necklaces now, or did you just want me to get some exercise?" He scowled at me. "Bah, it is not the bauble, it is the effrontery. Someone sought not to enrich themselves, but to rattle her composure. That is a trespass against the sanctity of domicile. An insult. I do not stomach insults. Not yours, maybe. But hers." His gaze flicked toward the closed door. "We shall see. She is overwrought, perhaps fanciful, but perhaps not. In either case, Archie, you will attend her tomorrow and collect what I require." "Which is?" "Information, names, circumstances, and, if possible, intimations of motive. Begin with the sister, Lydia. A woman who never liked her is a fertile source of malice." "Got it," I said, jotting it down. "Want me to lean on the doctor and the partner, too?" "Lean, no. Inquire, yes. Your manner will suffice." I shut the notebook and stretched. So, to recap, a dog collar disappears, reappears, and now we're knee-deep in family tensions, doctors with opinions, and banking partners with grudges. And I'm the one pounding the pavement while you sit here sniffing orchids. Pfui. Wolfe muttered, reaching for the beer glass I'd set on his desk. Your legs were made for pavement. Mine were not. That was the official dismissal, and I took it. But as I headed upstairs to my room, I couldn't shake the itch at the back of my skull. Wolfe was right. This wasn't about a collar. It was about nerve, the kind of nerve that slips into a widow's bedroom, takes something, puts it back, and leaves no trace but the smell of lilac. Whoever did it wasn't after pearls. They were after power. And tomorrow it looked like I'd be the one chasing their perfume trail through the city. Morning brought a pale grey sky and Fritz's coffee, which is the sort of alliance that can make even the worst assignments tolerable. At 10 sharp, I took a cab to East 73rd, where the Biltmore townhouse did its best to look unlived in. The stone was immaculate, the windows showed nothing, and the brass on the door was so polished I could count pores. The woman who opened it wore black and the expression that comes from having your instructions framed and hung above the sink. She was Edna, the maid, and she let me in with the kind of respect you give a policeman you don't like. Mrs. Biltmore was in the morning room, which had the kind of taste you buy from a department store curated by a duchess. Pale greens, one good landscape, a vase of white freesia that smelled like a conscience pretending innocence. She had the list Wolfe asked for, typed with 2 fingers and corrected in pencil. I took it and sat where I could see the hallway. Before I start asking stupid questions, I told her, "Show me the dressing room." She led, I followed. The dressing room was neat enough to rate military pay. The vanity lay along the windowed wall, the velvet case centered like a target. She touched it without opening it, as if the inside might rearrange itself if it saw light. I checked the windows. The latches were fine, the frames unscored. The rug had more pile than a banker's safe, so if there had been footprints, they'd sunk and never come up for air. The only thing that didn't match the scrupulous order was a shallow dish on the vanity with 3 pearl-headed pins and a 4th lying an inch off the dish at a fussy angle, like it had been set down by someone thinking about something else. "That was there?" I asked. She blinked. "I don't know." Edna keeps the small things in place. Edna came when called. Close up, you got a whiff of lilac, not from her, from the stairwell we'd just used. Edna's perfume, if she bothered, was the unscented pride of a woman who ironed her own apron. I asked her about the pins. She said she keeps them in the dish and always has. Then she frowned and admitted that yesterday one had been lying askew and she'd put it back. She hadn't told Mrs. Biltmore because, in her words, people get ideas. People do, I agreed, and kept mine pocketed for later. Back in the morning room, I looked over the list. It was a decent starter. Household staff: Edna, a cook named Magda, and a part-time man, Rollo, who handled packages and grumbled about the elevator, plus callers and family. 4 names earned underlines in the widow's careful hand. Lydia Biltmore, sister-in-law; Dr. Conrad Veen, physician; Miles Fenton, late husbands; partner; and a 4th, unexpected, Ava Sloane. When I asked, the widow's fingers tightened. "She was my husband's friend," she said. A pause. "And mine. She designs costume jewelry. The collar was her idea, years ago, for our dog at a charity parade." Everyone laughed, the way she said it. Laughter had been the problem. "Why underline her?" I asked. "Because she came by unannounced last week," Clara said, eyes on the freesia. "She said she had an inspiration and wanted to see the collar again. I told her it was misplaced. She made a joke I didn't enjoy." "What joke?" "That it might have grown legs," Clara said. "Ava is clever. She cannot resist being clever." I put the list away. "Let's meet them in order." Lydia first, by phone. She agreed to see me only because I didn't ask. I told her I was already in her lobby, and she could save us both the trouble of my coming up twice. In person, she was 50 and wore it like a well-cut coat. The apartment was deliberately severe. She refused coffee and then looked resentful that I hadn't insisted. "My sister-in-law has a flair for the little drama," she said, before I'd asked a question. "She grew up provincial and married into expectation. She compensates by losing trinkets, by flustering herself and paying men like you to take notes. Her mouth did something that might have been a smile on someone else. My brother indulged her. He had a sentimental streak for which he paid how with his health, Mr. Goodwin. She coddled him into ignoring sense. Conrad disagreed with her constantly about his diet, his rest, his indulgences. Her eyes were cool. If someone wanted to unsettle Clara, they would not have to try very hard. Did you?" I kept my tone friendly. No one opens a door to a battering ram when a tap will do. She considered me. If I wanted to unsettle Clara, I would not resort to parlor tricks. I would call a lawyer I left her with a thanks she didn't return and walked 3 blocks to Dr. Conrad Veen's office. Veen had the lean, dried look of a man who stores compassion the way a miser stores coins. Counted, exact, never more than the occasion requires. He confirmed he had treated the late Mr. Biltmore and had argued with Clara about everything that was not oxygen. He denied any interest in jewelry, canine or otherwise. "Do you like her?" I asked. He folded his hands. Liking is not a clinical category. Neither is annoyance, but you manage that fine. His eyebrow rose. If someone entered her room to move a bauble and leave it, the motive was not theft. It was to induce anxiety and perhaps dependence. I despise such manipulations. In medicine, we are admonished to do no harm. Socially, we are not who would benefit from her dependence. "Someone who wants her decisions softened," he said. I had the impression, while her husband was alive, that she sought approval as if it were a rationed product. People who need it make poor choices and are guided by those who offer it most cheaply. He meant the sister, the partner, the friend. Take your pick. I thanked him and went to the bank. Miles Fenton ran large and red-faced, the kind of man who shakes your hand as if wrestling your arm counts as rapport. He took me into a side office with too much wood and an oriental rug that had lost the battle years ago. He was eager to talk about the late Mr. Biltmore. He was less eager to talk about Mrs. Biltmore, which put him in a large club. "Delicate girl," he said, making delicate sound like a diagnosis. "Not our world. Your Mr. Wolfe should tell her to let the staff handle their business and stay out of it. Your world being money, our world being reality." He leaned back and watched to see if that hit home. As for the collar, good Lord. If someone took it and brought it back, it was a prank. We don't prosecute pranks. "You don't?" I said. "She might." He snorted through his nose. "Tell her to lock her door." He was a little too keen to be done with me, which is always an invitation to stay. I let my eyes do a slow tour and landed on a framed photo on the credenza. A summer party, men in shirt sleeves, women in hats, and Clara Biltmore beside Ava Sloane, laughing. Fenton followed my gaze and reached for the frame, but he only straightened it. "A staff picnic," he said. "Years ago. Looked like more fun than a staff picnic to me." "Then you need better picnics, Mr. Goodwin." He stood, and so did I. Ava Sloane's studio sat over a florist on Lexington, which did the air some good. She opened the door with a half-smile that would have been trouble if I were built for it. The place was organized as if creativity came with labels. On a table under the window lay a velvet swath studded with sketches of clasps. When I mentioned the collar, her eyes brightened and then cooled by careful degrees. "I did suggest it long ago," she said. "It was a lark." It looked very well on the animal. He had the temper of a duke and the legs of a sausage. "You joked it grew legs." Her mouth twitched. "I do make jokes. Clara does not always enjoy them. She took it badly the other day. Because? Because when one is frightened, jokes feel like drafts. You think they'll make you sick. She crossed to a drawer and pulled out a narrow case, opened it, and showed me pearls the size of pinheads. Seed pearls. Not expensive. Pretty, if you like tiny obedience. I gave her a string once. She worried the clasp would fail and lose them, so she never wore them. Some women own jewelry, the way others own fears. Who would want to unsettle her? I asked. Ava looked out the window at nothing particular. Anyone who wanted her to lean. Lydia wants her to lean toward propriety. Miles wants her to lean away from meddling. Conrad wants her to lean toward regimen. And me? She tilted her head. Perhaps I wanted her to lean toward me once. We all make nuisances of ourselves in the way we love. When I left, I carried with me the faint trace of lilac, this time unmistakably from a dish on her shelf, a bowl of dried petals that had seen better days. I sniffed out of habit and saw her watching me. It was fashionable 2 seasons ago, she said. Clara liked it. She changed her scent last winter back at the townhouse for one more look. I asked Edna about scents in general and lilac in particular. She said Mrs. Biltmore now wore something called bois de something, which sounded like money and trees, and that the lilac sachet had been thrown out after Mr. Biltmore's death because the house had too much old in it already. On my way to the door, I saw the part-time man, Rollo, bringing in a parcel. He had the shoulders of a dock and the ears of a spaniel. He set the box down and wiped his hands. I asked him if he'd seen anyone hanging around at odd hours. He shrugged and said only the usual. City men who loiter and smoke and watch women pass like it's a show. He hadn't noticed anyone going in who shouldn't. Then he scratched his ear and added that the dog, Prince or Pumpkin or something with P, had barked one night last week at nothing. He wasn't sure which night, but it was the night the hallway smelled like flowers for an hour and then didn't. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had perfected indolence to a science. I gave him the list, the notes, the lilac, and the pins. He listened with his eyes closed and his fingers templed, and when I finished, he opened them long enough to look annoyed. Lilac, he said. What an unctuous deceit. Maybe. Or maybe everyone in that circle likes to live in a faint fog. I took a chair. We have our circle, the sister who thinks lawyers are better than pranks, the doctor who diagnoses dependence, the partner who wants her quiet, the friend who jokes at the wrong time, and the house that smells like something it threw out. If you want me to pick a favorite, I'll toss a coin. No, Wolfe said. We will not flip, we will pry. Tonight you will telephone each of them and, with suavity, ask a question I shall compose. Tomorrow you will visit the jeweler who set the seed pearls on the clasp. And now, Archie, tell Fritz I will dine on trout. Something in this case is fishy, and I prefer to choose the fish myself. I made the calls from my desk with Wolfe listening like a cat pretends not to. He had supplied the wording, which he'd trimmed until it could cut. Ask each of them in the tone of idle curiosity whether they remembered the collar's clasp being unusually stiff the last time they handled it. 1 question, not 2. No dates, no prompting. If a person hasn't touched a thing, they don't have an opinion on how it feels. If they have, they'll reach for a memory and, with luck, show a seam. Lydia answered first. Her voice came dressed for court. I do not handle dog collars, Mr. Goodwin. I dislike dogs and ornament equally. If the clasp has feelings, you may consult a veterinarian. She rang off with an efficiency you could time a train by. Dr. Veen took longer and made it duller. I have not touched it, he said, which was the only sentence in the English language he seemed to like. If you require views on clasps, consult a jeweler. If you require views on Clara, she will do better if you remove stimuli, unwanted callers, inquisitive men, and nocturnal perfumes. Perfumes? He hesitated. She once wore lilac. It encouraged headaches. I advised against it. I thanked him for hating everything equally, and dialed Miles Fenton. He had the kind of phone manner that mistook noise for warmth. Stiff, you say? Years ago, maybe, he told me. At some charity thing with that ridiculous dog. I picked the collar up to look at it. Might have been sticky. Or my fingers were. Lemonade. Hard to tell. Which was a lot of mayonnaise for a yes or no. When I pressed for when years ago had been, he said, before the new tax tables, which may be the most banker way of dating a memory I've ever heard. Ava Sloane picked up on the second ring and let a smile into her hello. Clasps are prima donnas, she said after I delivered the question. They sulk in summer. On that collar, it used to be a bit stubborn. I told Clara she ought to have it looked at. I even offered to take it to Lurie, who did the original setting. When did you make that offer? I asked. Recently. Then, because she was clever. Is this a quiz with a prize? Sure, I said. The prize is you don't have to answer the next question I ask if you answer this one. Did you take it to Lurie? A pause. Yes, she said, light and frank. 3 weeks ago. I replaced 2 seed pearls and asked him to tune the spring. I told Clara. She was grateful that didn't fit my earlier conversation with Clara, who had called the disappearance a week ago and the reappearance 2 nights later. Either Clara had shaved the timeline or Ava had dressed it. Or both were telling the truth from different chairs, which is the most common lie there is. Wolfe opened his eyes long enough to say, "Tomorrow, Lurie," and closed them again as if he hadn't moved in the first place. I went the next morning. West 47th was acting like itself, a stream of men who know what carrots look like on paper and women who know what they look like on the hand. Hyman Lurie had a shop that pretended not to be expensive by being scrupulously plain. He came out from the back when I introduced myself and nudged his glasses higher on a nose that had earned the right to be trusted. Seed pearls on a dog collar? Yes, I remember, he said without rummaging. Original was years ago. Mrs. Biltmore with her friend Sloane, the designer. Nice work. Not my taste, but who is to judge taste? He folded his hands. Recently, someone brought it in for a service. 2 pearls replaced, the spring adjusted, the velvet cleaned. Who brought it? I kept my tone neutral. Miss Sloane, he said, and then, as if he'd been waiting to be asked, paid cash. I gave a receipt. She said it was a favor. Did Mrs. Biltmore come in, or sign for it? He frowned, thinking. No, we telephoned her for confirmation. A maid answered. Said Mrs. Biltmore approved the work and to send the bill by post. Miss Sloane paid anyway. I remember because she laughed and said, better to spare the postman. You're certain you telephoned there? Very, he said, and tapped a little carbon pad on his desk. He turned a page and showed me a notation in a tidy hand. Clara Biltmore. Okay by maid Edna? The question mark was his, written then and there. Edna or Emma? The line was not clear. She was brisk. Do you keep the old pearls? I asked. He gave me a look that said I had insulted his mother. I do not sell trash, he said. I return it to the client or discard it at their instruction. In this case, they were too small to set again. Miss Sloane said to discard. Could someone have made a copy? Another collar. Not by me, he said, and not cheaply elsewhere. The clasp is my own design. It has a minute internal tooth to prevent accidental opening. If you know what to feel for, you can tell it blind. I asked him to describe the tooth. He did, and I filed the description where I keep the details that matter later. Then I thanked him and took a walk to shake loose the dust. 3 weeks ago, Ava had carried the collar in. A week ago, Clara's version said it vanished. 2 nights later, it came back. Between those times, someone had phoned from the house and approved the work, or someone had sounded like they were phoning from the house. If Edna took the call, she hadn't mentioned it when I asked, which could mean she hadn't placed it in the Tell Madam folder because it had sounded like housekeeping. Or it could mean someone else with access to Clara's phone and Edna's manner had smoothed the way. I swung by the townhouse again on the off chance Edna had decided to like me. She let me in with the same frugal welcome and stood in the hall like she was preventing a draft. When I asked about a call from Lurie's, 3 weeks back, seed pearls, a spring, she frowned and kept frowning until the movement made an answer. I speak to many trades, she said. If it was the jeweler, I may have said yes, because Mrs. Sloane had been here and asked, and Madam wanted it done. Or I may have said I'd ask and then said yes, because Madam always says yes to repairs. That is possible. Is it possible you said yes because the person on the line said Mrs. Biltmore had already approved and you were confirming? That is more possible, she said, with the honesty of a woman who dislikes embroidery. People talk quickly on the telephone and think I will run. I do not run, but I do not argue either. Did you tell Mrs. Biltmore after? Her mouth tightened. She does not enjoy details. On my way out, I found Rollo having a smoke on the stoop, calculating whether the weather was a friend. I asked him what day the hallway had smelled like flowers. He chuckled without amusement. The night the dog gave us a speech, he said. 2 nights before, Madam had the collar back, I think. The smell came from upstairs and went down. Not the maid's kind, the other kind. Expensive. I opened a window. The dog didn't stop because the window didn't bark. Ever see Miss Sloane carry a small case out? Velvet, long? Never, he said, and scratched at his neck. But the sister, she leaves with folders like she's inventing paper. And the banker, he left with his hat in his mouth. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the Lurie account and the rest, all of it, including my opinion that either the timeline had been juggled or the same hands had played 3 different tunes. Bring the collar in quietly, make it vanish loudly, return it politely. Wolfe listened with his lids down and his lips pursed, a Buddha interrupted by indigestion. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. It is not the collar, he said. It is the permission. Miss Sloane assumed it. The maid granted it. Madame forgot it. Meanwhile, a perfume returns that Madame has repudiated. Someone is rehearsing her, Archie. In the part of herself she used to play meaning that whoever does not wish her to change wishes to show her that she has not, he said. This is a poor man's hypnotism, a collar where it was, a scent that was, a servant answering as she has always answered. It is the past set delicately upon the present like a lace doily. That's poetic, I said. Want me to frame it? Frame nothing, he said. Fetch Saul. And before dinner, telephone Miss Sloane again and ask, as from yourself, whether she prefers lilac or sandalwood. If she answers lilac, ask her why she abandoned it. If she answers sandalwood, ask her when she adopted it. We will compare her dates to the maid's memory, and if the dates don't dance, they will, he said, but not to your tune. To mine, Saul came over just after 8, smelling like rain that hadn't decided whether it would fall. Wolfe briefed him in 4 sentences that included 2 nouns, 1 verb, and a tone that implied the universe would cooperate or regret it. The assignments were simple because they were impossible. Saul would park himself near the Biltmore townhouse and make a list of comings and goings that wouldn't be in anyone else's notebook, especially the doorman's. If Lydia left with folders or Fenton arrived with charm, he'd catch it. If Ava brought anything small enough to be trouble, he'd make a note of the shape of the trouble and the time it shook hands with the street. Before Saul left, I made the call Wolfe had asked for. Ava answered as if she'd been waiting for a different voice and would accept mine in the meantime. I asked if she preferred lilac or sandalwood. She said sandalwood now. Lilac had been a phase years ago. When I asked when she'd switched, she said last winter, December, after a cold that made everything smell like pencils. She laughed and said scents were a costume you wore on your pulse. I told her not to wear one to a robbery and hung up. December, I told Wolfe. Edna says Clara swapped lilac for bois de whatever last winter. Rollo says the house smelled like flowers 2 nights before the collar came home. Lilac is not sandalwood, Wolfe said, which was either a philosophy or an observation. He closed his eyes with the air of a man drawing a net tight in his head. We will not pry by force. We will allow taste to betray habit. That was his idea of good night, so I left him to his thoughts and checked the locks before going up. I always check them. Call it superstition, call it professional pride. I've escorted too many uninvited guests back out into the weather to forget the basics. The chain was on the front, the bolt thrown, the office windows latched, the safe in the alcove shut and content with itself. Fritz had retired and took with him the aroma of something he'd coaxed into tasting like comfort. All fine. Morning started at a civil hour. At 9 I came down to the office to find a stillness that had something extra in it, as if the air had been taught a new trick overnight. Wolfe wasn't in his chair. He was upstairs with the plants. My desk was as I'd left it, except for a change so small it took a beat to register. On the blotter near Wolfe's chair, a dot winked at me. I leaned in. It was either a breadcrumb that had learned discipline or a pearl that had lost its setting. I didn't touch it. "Wolfe," I called up the stairs, keeping my voice level. "When you come down, don't sit." He arrived in the doorway with the kind of speed that means none to anyone else, and a great deal to me. His eyes tracked where mine were fixed and stayed there. He crossed to the desk and bent without bending, his bulk describing a geometry you don't teach. He looked, not longer than 2 seconds. "Don't breathe on it," he said, which is rich advice from a man. I didn't. We both took in the rest of the room with our peripheral minds, chairs where they belonged, books asleep on their shelves, globes smug, safe frowning mildly, unchanged. But on the credenza, the orchid log, Fritz's tidy columns of notes had a corner turned down that hadn't been turned yesterday. It could have been a draft. It could have been a finger. Wolfe rang for Fritz. When Fritz appeared, he came fast enough to confirm he'd noticed it too. He did not gasp. He never does. He only looked at the pearl, at the folded page, at us. "I did not set that," he said, with enough contained heat to cook an egg. "And I do not fold my corners." "You closed and opened this room?" Wolfe asked. "I closed at 11, Fritz said. "I opened at 8. In between I slept, as prescribed. I checked the front door. Still locked. The chain as I'd left it. The windows in the office firm. The door to the hall not showing its age. If we had had a guest in the night, he liked our procedures enough to mimic them on his way out." Wolfe's finger hovered above the pearl. "Seed," he said softly, almost to himself. "Not a full pearl." "A seed," I said. "From the collar." "Or its sisters," he answered. Fetched the envelope from the second top drawer, the glassine sleeves. I slid a sleeve under the tiny orb and let it fall into its transparent bed without letting my skin get acquainted. He sealed it and wrote 3 words and the time. His hand was steady. His lips were not. "Now," he said, "your notebook." It lay where I keep it, under the corner of the blotter. I opened it and saw immediately that the page I'd written Lurie on had a faint grey smear along the right margin, as if a pencil had been touched there and then thought better of it. The handwriting was mine. The words were mine. The smear was not. If you think that's thin, you haven't had your pockets turned out by professionals. The difference between privacy and the absence of theft is the width of a fingertip. "We will not call the police," Wolfe said, reading my face. "We will not grant our trespasser the audience he intends. We will reply in the manner he understands. He looked at Fritz. The kitchen? Intact, Fritz said, but his eyes said he would be verifying the placement of every spice and the angle of every pan. For Fritz, the sanctity of the kitchen is a religion. For Wolfe, the office is the temple. For me, the notebook is the hymnal. All three had been sung over. Saul came in on the dot of 10, which would have pleased a man who cared about dots. We told him, and he went still in his Saul way, where stillness is a blade. He inspected the windows, the doors, the baseboards, and finally the air. Lilac, he said very lightly. I had smelled nothing. Now that he'd named it, I caught a ghost of it, thinner than yesterday's memory. I looked at Fritz. Fritz nodded, unhappy. He had aired the house for 10 minutes at 8. It hadn't been enough to eject a suggestion. Someone with a key? Saul asked. No one has a key to my house who is not presently in it, Wolfe said, which leaves skill, audacity, or permission. Permission, I said, and let it land where it needed to. Wolfe steepled his fingers. We were shown a collar removed and returned, a scent discarded and revived, a maid's habit exploited. Now we are shown a pearl placed in a page grazed. The author is practicing on us what he practiced on her. He wishes to demonstrate that the past is a lever and he a patient hand. Encouraging us to lean, I said. Toward the wrong conclusion, Wolfe said. We will oblige him by leaning nowhere. He dictated a note to Clara that I typed and sealed. No mention of our house, only a request that she bring the collar in person at 4. If the collar was a toy, he would see it on his desk by his own invitation. If it was a tool, the person who used it would need to adjust. I called the jeweler, Lurie, and asked a question that made him suck air between his teeth. Could a seed pearl be knocked out by gentle pressure from a nail? He said not if he had set it. If it was out, it had been eased, not jarred. He offered to look at the seed under a loupe and tell me whether it was his lot or a cousin. I told him to be available. Before lunch, Fritz reported 3 small offenses that added up to none if you were a stranger, and to insult if you were Fritz. The paprika had been turned so the label faced inward, the salt jar's lid had been tightened 1 notch past Fritz's habit, and the copper ladle hung 1 hook to the left of home. He didn't look at Wolfe when he told it, but Wolfe felt it like a bruise. We will eat, Wolfe said. And we did, because that was 1 lever no intruder would get to pull. Afterward, he settled in his chair as if he'd just invented chairs. The pearl in its sleeve sat on the corner of the desk, immodest in its importance. I took the phone and called Lydia, Miles, and Ava, each with a form of the same polite lie. Mr. Wolfe requests your presence at 4 for a brief consultation. Lydia said she had a committee but would attend. Miles said he had a meeting but would attend louder. Ava said of course, and then softer. Is Clara well? I said she would be. At 3 the air shifted again, this time not perfume but anticipation. Wolfe's eyes were shut, but he wasn't asleep. He was listening for the sound a case makes when it comes to heel. Outside, Saul took his place like a shadow with a schedule. Inside, I checked the chain another 2 times and the blotter once, and found my pencil where I had left it, which felt like a victory. At 4 on the nose, the bell rang, and the sanctity of the brownstone waited to see who would ask admission and why. Wolfe lifted a hand, and I went to open our temple to the faithful and the profane. I opened the door to a procession of temperaments disguised as people. Clara came first, the velvet case held to her like a life-preserver. Lydia arrived behind her with a flat envelope and a flatter expression. Miles Fenton made the stairs complain and brought a handshake for the air. Ava Sloane slipped in last, carrying nothing but sandalwood and a smile she could turn off mid-watt. Saul had given me a nod from the sidewalk that meant nobody had shadowed them, obvious enough to insult him. I closed the door, set the chain, and ushered them into the office where Wolfe had arranged the furniture as if it were a diagram for civility. He didn't rise. He acknowledged each by name with a tilt of the head that endowed and deducted favor at once. "Mrs. Biltmore," he said, "the collar." She set the velvet case on his desk with the reverence of a ceremonial offering. I opened it at Wolfe's gesture. The thing glittered like a joke that cost money. Wolfe didn't touch it. He looked at the clasp the way a botanist looks at a root. "We will begin with a small imposition," he said. "I wish each of you to try the clasp. Nothing strenuous. I'm interested only in your hands. Mr. Goodwin will place a linen over it so you cannot see, and you will open and close, if you can, by touch. Mrs. Biltmore will go last." Miles gave a snort that was trying to be a laugh. "A parlor game." "A test," Wolfe said mildly. "You are free to fail." I folded a clean napkin over the clasp and positioned their chairs one at a time. Lydia first. Her gloves were gray, tight as opinions. She extended 2 fingers, found metal, and recoiled an inch, not from fear, distaste. After a perfunctory nudge, she withdrew. "Your napkin prevents seeing," she noted. "That is its function," Wolfe said. "Thank you." He made a small check on a card. He hadn't given himself a pencil, but one materialized between his fingers. Miles went at it with the energy he used on doorways. He prodded, poked, and pushed. The clasp complained. I would have interrupted. Wolfe didn't. After a full 15 seconds, Miles grunted, and by accident, or accident's cousin, the catch clicked half a breath, and then set its teeth again. "Sticky," he announced, pleased to have an opinion. Ava slid into the chair as if chairs had been invented for her. Under the linen, her fingers settled, paused, drifted like they were looking for a friend in a crowd, and then, click, smooth, neat. She closed it as easily. When she lifted her hands, she was smiling at the napkin. "I told her once to have the spring tuned," she said. Wolfe made his check mark and said nothing. He shifted his eyes to Clara, who had watched all this like a woman watching waves measure the distance to her chair. She reached out, searched delicately, pressed wrong twice, and retreated. "I never did it," she murmured. "I avoid clasps. They disoblige me." Wolfe's hand floated in a small dismissal that comforted without comforting. He removed the napkin and regarded the collar again. Then he turned his head, and I put the glassina sleeve with our office pearl where he could see it. He let the others look too. Lydia said, "A bead." Miles said, "Dust." Ava leaned in and narrowed her eyes, and Clara shut hers. "This," Wolfe said, "was placed on my desk this morning by a person who visited my house uninvited in the night." The visit was otherwise courteous. A page turned, a page touched, a hint of lilac. "You will forgive me if I do not extend thanks that rearrange the air." Miles stopped smiling. Lydia's fingers tightened on the flat envelope she hadn't released. Ava's head cocked, the movement of a woman storing the details she'll sketch later. Clara made a small sound, and then pretended she hadn't. "No door forced," Wolfe went on. "No window marred. Very neat. We will leave aside the question of how and attend to why, which is the only question that yields dividends. Whoever did it wished to inform me that the game he played in your house, Mrs. Biltmore, remove, return, rearrange, could be played in mine. He wished, too, to instruct me that a seed pearl may be eased from its place with delicacy, without violence. Mr. Goodwin. Call Mr. Lurie, I dialed. Lurie answered with his careful voice. Wolfe identified himself and asked his question without embroidery. Could he tell from a seed pearl's drill and nacre whether it belonged to the lot he set on the Biltmore collar? In many cases, yes, Lurie said. The angle of the drill, the thickness of nacre relative to size, small discolorations particular to a batch. We will bring it presently, Wolfe said. Do not leave. He hung up and gave the room back to us. Lydia broke the silence, because someone had to, and she trusted her words more than ours. If you believe one of us trespassed on your premises, Mr. Wolfe, I suppose you will say so, and have done. If I believed and could demonstrate it, he said, I would. For now I will say only that the person who did so has also contrived the events at Mrs. Biltmore's. The approval by a maid for work ordered by a friend, the reappearance of a scent renounced, the removal and return of a trifle to compel attention. The object is control, not commodity. The method is insinuation, not theft. Miles shifted in his chair like a man who has been caught sitting on the wrong hat. Control for what? Her money? There are straighter roads. There are, Wolfe said, but they are less suited to a temperament that enjoys arranging lives as if they were mantelpieces. Ava looked at Clara, not at Wolfe. Who wants to arrange you, darling? She asked softly. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a question from a person who had arranged things and learned the cost. Before Clara could answer, the phone rang again. Saul. I took it, and he didn't waste me a syllable. Man across the street in a brown felt, watching windows, went to the payphone on 3rd, dialed, spoke 3 words, hung up, moved on. The words were, he has it. When? I asked, though I knew. Now, Saul said, and hung up because he had to be where the man would be next. I relayed it. Wolfe pursed his mouth as if he'd tasted a lemon he had ordered on purpose. So, he said, our audience waits for an act. Very well. Mrs. Biltmore, if you please. When the collar returned to your dressing table, did anything else return with it? Anything small, trivial, the kind of trifle one overlooks unless one is made of nerves? She stared at the velvet case as if it were a stage set that might reveal a trap door. There was a note, she said finally, ashamed at the sound of the word. A card. Blank. No, not blank. There was a crease. It had been folded and unfolded and folded again. Edna threw it out. She said it was nothing. It was not nothing, Wolfe said, and nodded like a man who has just been handed a rung for the ladder he already began to climb. You kept nothing of it. She shook her head. Lydia made a small, impatient noise. A crease, she said. We are reconstructing villains from origami now. From habit, Wolfe corrected. The person who toys with a woman's sense of safety toys too, with paper, with placement, with the angle of a jar lid. He is the sort who cannot leave a thing alone if he believes it is not yet as it should be. He turned his head. Mr. Fenton, when you were in Mrs. Biltmore's house last week, did you adjust anything in her morning room? A frame, a vase. Miles laughed too loud. I'm not the butler. No, Wolfe said. You are a man who straightened a frame in your office when I looked at it, and you did it with the hand of habit. You did it again as you came in my door, Miles flushed. You watch too much. That is my occupation, Wolfe said. Miss Sloane, you handled this clasp under the cloth with ease I will not insult by underestimating. You brought the collar to Lurie, and you paid him. Your motive might be generosity. It might be control disguised as care. Mrs. Biltmore, you defer. Your deference is a currency anyone in this room may spend. The sandalwood thinned as the room heated. Fritz came with beer for Wolfe and water for the rest. Ava took hers and didn't drink. Lydia took hers and held it like a gavel. Clara's hands shook until she put hers down. This is not the revelation, Wolfe said, and the room exhaled in 3 different registers. It is positioning. The revelation requires a fact we will have in 1 hour from Mr. Lurie. Meanwhile, the collar remains here. Mr. Goodwin will escort Mrs. Biltmore home. On his return, he will visit Lurie with the seed. Miss Sloane, Mr. Fenton, Miss Biltmore. If you are tempted to telephones, restrain yourselves. Your messages will be received by people I prefer to hear from. First Miles bristled. You can't hold us. I do not intend to, Wolfe said. I intend to hold your attention. He looked at Clara. Madam, will you entrust the collar to me for 1 night? She hesitated, and then, with the sudden courage of the very tired, nodded. "Yes," Ava said quietly. "Be careful with it." "He bites." "I have no intention of putting it on," Wolfe said, and for the first time all afternoon I felt the corner of my mouth try to behave. He flicked his eyes at me. "Archie." I got my hat. The chain slid back, the door opened, and the late light on 35th Street looked like a city pretending innocence. As I stepped out with Clara, Saul's shadow detached from a lamp post and fell in behind. Somewhere, a man in a brown felt decided whether to keep watching or to change his hat. Inside, a seed pearl waited to tell a truth to a jeweler, and Wolfe waited to tell a truth to us all. Saul and I got Clara into a cab without any of the neighbors needing to invent a story about it. She rode stiff, the velvet case on her lap like a pet that might bolt. When we reached the townhouse, Edna opened before we rang, which told me she'd been waiting behind the wood with her hand on the knob. Inside, the air was unambiguously sandalwood. If lilac had made an appearance, it had been shown the door and told not to come back without a chaperone. Clara took me upstairs as if the stairs might have shifted position since morning. In the dressing room, the vanity sat pure and symmetrical, the dish of pins properly corralled. I looked a shade closer. Yesterday, one pin had been lying a breath outside the dish. Today, all four were aligned like little soldiers with their heads at 12 o'clock. It was the sort of improvement no one asks for, and only one kind of person notices. "Edna," I said. "I didn't move them," she answered from the doorway, which meant she'd moved enough things in this house to know which accusation fit which room. I haven't been in here since I dusted at noon. "Then someone else did," I said, and didn't turn to see the effect. Clara set the case down on the vanity and steadied it with her hand. "I don't want to be afraid in my bedroom," she said. She wasn't talking to me so much as to the furniture. I can bear to be foolish anywhere else. "You're not foolish," I told her. "Someone wants you to feel arranged." "That's not the same as being arranged," Saul's voice came from the hall, low and practical. "I'll sit street side tonight and the next, Mrs. Biltmore. If any of your friends decide to enjoy the air, I'll enjoy it too." On my way out, I paused by the freezer in the morning room. The stems had been rotated in the vase a quarter turn. It made them present better, if you like your flowers to face company. I made a note and left it there where it could annoy whichever temperament required facing. Lurie's shop had a light on for me and a loupe ready. He didn't bother with small talk. He put the sleeve on a square of black cloth and went to work, a jeweler's hands doing what surgeons promise. He looked, rotated, breathed, and finally set the loupe down like a man who had considered his verdict and would now allow the world to hear it. "Not mine," he said. "Not from the lot I used on that collar 3 weeks ago, nor from the lot I used years ago. The drill is at a sharper angle. The nacre is faintly thicker. I would say French River, not Japanese lake, but I would not swear on it without time and a microscope. It's a seed, yes, but not my seed." "Someone sprinkled it," I said. "Someone wanted you to think it came from where it did not," he corrected mildly. "I can tell you another thing. It was set recently." The drill has a whisker, a tiny burr, like the bit was fresh and the hand not completely sure. I thanked him. "If I need you later, I'll send you something less delicate," I said. He smiled a jeweler's smile, price and patience in one expression, and I left with the news folded in my pocket, where it could keep company with my other unsociable facts. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe heard me from the hall and had a look on his face I wish I could rent by the hour. He took the sleeve, read the words Lurie had rewritten for my benefit. "Not mine," and set it beside the collar as if he were matching swatches. He didn't grunt. He seemed pleased, which is what passes for excitement in our line. "So," he said, "our visitor lacks either access or nerve." He could not take from the collar without being noticed, or he does not yet dare. He manufactured a token instead. That is not slovenly. It is prudent, but it is also a confession. To what? I asked. To ignorance at the level he wants us to credit him with, Wolfe said. He wishes to be known as the man who can pluck pearls from where he pleases and place them where he pleases. Instead, he is the man who can only imitate his own flourish. Which helps us how? By reducing the set, he said. Miss Sloane would not fake a pearl poorly. She knows the difference. Dr. Veen would not fake a pearl at all. He would prescribe one. Mr. Fenton believes a frame is improved by being straight, but does not know a drill from a derrick. Miss Biltmore, Lydia, has taste, but decorative contempt is not technical skill. You're not letting Ava off, I said. I am not, he said. She could also be staging ignorance. But I prefer to be informed by what people do clumsily. Mr. Fenton is clumsy in fine things and exact in habits. Lydia is exact in judgments and clumsy in affection. Miss Sloane is exact in craft and clumsy in mercy. Our trespasser is exact in placement and clumsy in provenance. Attend. He dictated 3 notes with the speed of a man setting bait with both hands. To Lydia, a request that she bring, at 8 that evening, a photograph from the charity parade where the dog wore the collar the first time. The one of you with Mrs. Sloane, he added, as if Lydia needed encouragement. To Fenton, a request for copies of the trust instruments establishing the widow's allowances and any conditions precedent, with an apology for the dullness. To Ava, an invitation to bring her original sketch of the clasp and any notes she had sent to Lurie for my education. He signed all 3, let me address and dispatch them by messenger, and then told me to telephone Edna with a message so simple it would either be obeyed or set someone's hair on fire. The caller would spend the night at the brownstone, and Mrs. Biltmore should change nothing in the dressing room, including the positions of pins or flowers, until she heard from me in the morning. She will comply, he said, and if she does not, someone will. Either will interest me. Fritz appeared to report that the kitchen had forgiven and forgotten after a stern talk. Wolfe permitted him a small glass of beer, which Fritz declined in favor of moral superiority. When he left, Wolfe said, "Tonight we invert our guest's pleasure. He comes to empty rooms. We will give him a room full of people. He comes to control the scene. We will schedule it." 8, I asked. Staggered, he said. 7:45 for Fenton. He will be early. 8 for Miss Biltmore. She will be on the dot. 8:15 for Miss Sloane. She will be late by a heartbeat to compensate for not wanting to be. And Clara? She will come at 9, he said, and she will not be told that the others were here first. Mr. Goodwin, you will ensure that she arrives into a room that appears surprised to see her. You're building an evening, I said. A demonstration, he said. The person who has been arranging will attempt to arrange my arrangement. He will place himself to receive information and to act upon it. Saul, from the sidewalk, will tell us where that place is. We ate lamb the way Fritz instructs lamb to be eaten, and during coffee the bell rang at 7:38. Fenton. He came in with a leather folder and a face that wanted to be congratulated for its openness. Wolfe was courteous and bored. I took the folder to the table and laid out the papers. Trust documents are naps bound in ribbon, but I read enough to learn what I needed. Clara's allowance was generous, but locked. Any major disbursements required the co-signature of either the partner or the sister-in-law pending the appointment of a new trustee. Mr. Fenton had co-signed 2 modest disbursements in the last month for household repairs. I asked what the repairs were. He described a plumber's bill and a carpet cleaner's invoice with such exactness I had to give him credit for knowing what was in his hand. Lydia arrived at 8, precisely with a brittle smile and the photograph in an envelope that had not been flat when it left home. The picture showed Ava laughing, Clara younger and shyly proud, the dog wearing his velvet like he was used to better. Lydia tried to put the photo on the edge of Wolfe's desk. Wolfe directed her to the table, which to Lydia felt like demotion. I laid it beside the trust instruments and kept my fingers away from the edges so as not to give her more to disapprove of. At 8:14, Ava drifted in on timetable and sent. A sketchbook under her arm, a pencil tucked in her hair, as if it were a joke she shared with herself. She opened to a page where a clasp had been worked out in 4 variations, the one Lurie called his, except the earliest sketch had the tooth in a slightly different position. "I improved it after I spoke to Lurie," she said. "He made it more foolproof." She glanced at Fenton's folder with distaste and at Lydia's envelope with something I couldn't pass yet. While they were there, we did not talk about pearls. We did not talk about collars. We talked about the late Mr. Biltmore's dog's temper, the weather's temper, the city's lack of temperate zones between manners and commerce. Wolfe let silences sit where they would collect dust. Outside, a cab idled and moved on. Twice the phone rang. Fritz took messages no one needed. At 8:50, Saul called and said only, "Brownfelt, West Side, telephone booth at the corner, watching the door." I said, "Thank you," as if the call had been for me from an aunt. At 9, Clara arrived with her courage tied in a bow under her chin. I met her at the door and, as instructed, led her in so that discovering the others would feel like waking to find furniture rearranged, familiar pieces in unfamiliar places. She stopped and steadied. Lydia's mouth did nothing. Fenton stood as if chairs had been outlawed. Ava rose half an inch and decided to complete the motion. Wolfe watched the 4 points of his compass align and then, with the faintest motion of his hand, set them to revolve. "Madam," he said to Clara, "you are welcome. You will forgive me for asking the others to bring objects. They accommodate my impatience. One more accommodation, and I shall earn your gratitude by ending this." That was overpromising even for Wolfe, but none of them knew him as I did. He gestured me to close the door, and when I did, the brown stone felt like what it is at its best and worst, a room where a mind does its work and expects the world to keep up. Wolfe let the silence fatten until it could be carved. Then he said, almost idly, "Before we begin, a courtesy for my files. Mr. Goodwin will give each of you a card. Kindly write your name and the hour. Use the pen provided." His eyes strayed to me. I produced 4 stiff white cards and 1 fountain pen that behaves for me and no one else. Fenton went first. He gripped the pen as if it might buck, scrawled Miles Fenton in letters that bullied the card, and set it down flat, a fraction out of square with the blotter. Lydia watched him fail at alignment, took the pen like a magistrate taking an oath, wrote her name in a controlled hand, and, without thinking, pressed the card's lower edge against the desk to make a neat crease, released, frowned, and smoothed it back flat with 2 strokes of her gloved fingers. Ava smiled at her own turn, wrote with a pretty loop on the Y, then idly rolled the card over and traced the grain with her thumb. No pressure, no mark. Clara, last, signed small, then placed the pen across the top as if to keep the name from escaping. Wolfe's lids lowered a millimeter. Satisfaction measured in hairlines. "Thank you," he said. He didn't touch the cards. "Now, a demonstration. Mr. Fenton, when you stand, you straighten what lies near your hand. You corrected a frame in your office when we looked at it. You corrected the edge of my hall table when you came in. Miss Biltmore, you crease and uncrease paper when your attention is on something else. You did so now. Miss Sloane, your habit is to test surfaces with your thumb before you trust them. You did so now. Mrs. Biltmore, you avoid closing gestures. All this is unimportant, unless one wishes to use your habits as tools." Fenton produced what passed with him for a chuckle. "You'll forgive me if I don't feel skinned." "Forgiveness," Wolfe said, "isn't a service I offer." I put a shallow porcelain bowl on the credenza, the one Fritz uses for olives when he's feeling continental. In it, under a square of gauze, sat a handful of dried lilac petals I had persuaded from the florist on the corner by looking like a man who needed a favor. The room's air is good at keeping secrets. Tonight, it told one. Lydia shifted her head as if to avoid a draught. Fenton didn't notice. Ava's eyes went to the bowl and then to Clara. Clara's hand rose half an inch to her throat and stopped. Wolfe said, "Lilac returns to a room where it was banished. The person who put it there wants not to comfort, but to declare that he can choose for you again. It is a crude power, sent but efficient." "Who did it?" Clara asked, quiet like a string pulled taut. "Someone who knows your habits and the habits of your house," Wolfe said. "Someone who disapproves of your changes because they unseat him. Someone who desires you to remain corrigible." Fenton had had enough of philosophy. He leaned forward, made his hands into that tent men make when they want to look executive. "If this is going to end in an accusation, end it," he said. "I have the patience of a banker, which is to say none." "The bank you represent," Wolfe murmured, "has shown more." "Mr. Goodwin." I slid the trust papers toward me and tapped the top sheet. 2 weeks before the collar's first vanishing act, Mrs. Biltmore authorized a plumber and a carpet cleaning. Both countersigned by you. Routine, sure. But there's a third request here. Denied. Fenton's chin came up. A transfer to a separate account for discretionary household expenses. She doesn't need it. The house has staff. Denied by you, I said, and pending by Miss Biltmore if appealed. The result is that for anything not nailed down, she has to ask. Lydia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She is not a child, she said, but she lacks the habit of prudence. The habit of dependence is harder to break, Wolfe said. Encourage it, and a woman who might change will not. She will ask permission until asking is her nature. He let that sit. Someone has been training Mrs. Biltmore in asking again. He has been training her house as well, Ava's voice, calm and unsparing. You mean Miles? Fenton began a denial. Wolfe ignored it. Not solely, he said. Mr. Fenton straightens what he touches. He would straighten a frame, a ladle, a line of pins. He would also hire a man to stand under a street lamp in a brown Felton telephone. He has it. When he saw a velvet case go into a detective's pocket. But Mr. Fenton is clumsy in fine things. The seed pearl placed on my desk this morning was from the wrong lot and drilled by an unpracticed hand. He would not know the difference, and the person he engaged did not either. Miss Biltmore, on the other hand, would know that lilac was once favored here and might, from a drawer, produce a sachet left over from a winter when grief had the run of the rooms. Lydia stood as if her name had been called by a teacher she disliked. Are you accusing me of creeping into my brother's widow's bedroom to perfume it? Of course not. I do not enter uninvited. You enter by telephone, Wolfe said. Lurie's pad notes, okay by maid, Edna. It was your voice, or one like it, brisk, assured, the voice of a woman accustomed to authorization. You gave consent for Miss Sloane to repair a collar you considered vulgar, because the act would bind Clara to gratitude and keep her where she has been. And you would not soil your hands with a pearl. You would crease a card until it knew its place. Her color rose. She didn't sit. This is grotesque. It is accurate, Wolfe said. If Lydia was a flint, Fenton was a box of matches. He slapped his palm on the arm of the chair. Enough! Even if any of this nonsense were true, what's the point? A joke? A correction? Who is hurt? Clara, Ava said, flat. Clara is hurt. She looked at her, not at Wolfe, and I abetted it. I took your collar to Lurie to spare you a task you needed to learn again, deciding, sending, signing. I called it kindness because I liked being necessary. She exhaled through her nose. I am an artisan. I cannot leave a thing alone either good, Wolfe said. A confession without an indictment. It assists. The phone rang. I took it. Saul low. Brown felt crossed to a new booth, made 2 calls, one to Biltmore residence. Edna answered. 3 words. Coming from there. Second call to a bank exchange. 10 seconds. Hung up. He's settled to watch your door. I told him to keep his seat and brought the news in. Wolfe's mouth compressed. Mr. Fenton, he said, dismiss your watcher. He is no longer required. Fenton tried hauteur and got halfway to huff. I don't know what you're... You installed him, Wolfe said, the timbre of a man tired of stupid. When a man watches a house not his own and telephones a bank, the line is short. I'm not asking you. I'm instructing you. Fenton's eyes went to the door and back, calculating how many steps to indignation and whether the stairs would honor it. He stayed in his chair. Suppose, he said, I find this conversation unprofitable and leave. You may, Wolfe said. But at 11 tomorrow, when the police are apprised that an agent of your bank has been using the telephone to coordinate surveillance of a widow, you will find your time more expensively occupied. Lydia sat then. She did it carefully, like a queen in a play, and laid her gloved hand over her card, as if to stop it from creasing further. Here, Wolfe said, is the posture. Mr. Fenton, who needs Mrs. Biltmore to require co-signatures. Miss Biltmore, who needs Mrs. Biltmore to be instructed. Miss Sloane, who needs Mrs. Biltmore to be grateful. Each of you arranged her. Then someone in that set, or aligned with it, arranged me and did it badly. I will finish arranging this. He glanced at me. Tomorrow at 6, he said. They will all return. Including Dr. Vane, Clara startled. Conrad. Why? Because someone in this matter can tell the difference between tending and tampering, Wolfe said. I prefer my vocabulary precise, and doctors are good at Latin. He lifted a finger. Do not telephone him. Mr. Goodwin, will I stood. The cards lay in a tidy row like obedient guilt. The collar, closed, kept its secret. The bowl under gauze held its breath. I saw Lydia's fingers want to smooth the corner of her card again. She didn't. Fenton rose, thought better of it, sat. Ava watched Clara with a look that made promises to stop helping. Clara looked at Wolfe as a woman looks at a mountain that claims it won't move, but promises to build you a road. Wolfe said, that is all for tonight. He didn't add an enough, but it hung in the room anyway. I opened the door. The chain murmured its complaint. The brown felt somewhere on the street shifted its weight and waited for a job that was ending. Tomorrow at 6, Wolfe would make the floor steady or prove it had never been anything else. The house felt tired the next morning, like it had sat up with us and decided humans were a poor use of varnish. Wolfe was in his chair by 9 with the collar on a square of black velvet, the seed pearl in its sleeve, and his temper organized. He told me to telephone Dr. Vane and invite him at 6 for a brief consultation regarding a patient's household equilibrium. If that phrasing didn't lure a physician, nothing would. Vane accepted in the tone of a man agreeing to look at a crooked picture on his way down a hall. Next, Wolfe said, Mr. Fenton's shadow. He meant the brown felt. Saul will identify him. You will convert him. Saul had the name by 10, Warren Kitson, ex-police, now building services for the bank, which meant he was paid to watch things Fenton considered his. Kitson had selected a luncheonette on 3rd as his office. Saul nodded at the window, and I went in as if I had always eaten there. Kitson's hat sat on the counter like a second head. I ordered coffee, glanced at his reflection in the mirror above the pie, and said in an even voice, Your employer wishes you to telephone him. If you do it from the booth on the corner in precisely 20 minutes, he will believe you have learned something useful. Then at 5, you will be at 35th Street, Not across from our door, but in the florist's alcove, where you will see who pauses to read the window. If you report that to me at 5:15, I will ensure no one asks your employer why he had a man watching a widow's house. If you decline, I will arrange for that inquiry to be a matter of record." He studied my face in the mirror the way men used to study horse flesh. "What do you want me to see at 5? He asked. "Who stops?" I said. "How long?" "Which hand they use to shade their eyes, and whether they straighten anything unnecessary." He swallowed coffee that hadn't cooled and said nothing, which was yes. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had Fritz produce envelopes and cards. He dictated 3 notes for delivery at noon. To Lydia, "At 6 we shall consider the best method for relieving Mrs. Biltmore of habits not her own. Your contribution will be essential to Fenton. At 6 we shall determine whether the bank's interests are better served by autonomy than permission. Your promptness will be noted to Ava. At 6 I will decide whether Kraft can atone for trespass. Please bring the first sketch of the velvet setting, not the clasp." He signed all 3, sat, and let them travel at the speed of a boy with a cap and a belief in stairs. "Edna," he said when I had her on the wire, "will do nothing today. She will not move a pin, a vase, or a dish. She will not permit anyone to adjust anything. She will answer the telephone as she always does, but if Miss Biltmore or Mr. Fenton calls, she will say Mrs. Biltmore is resting and cannot be disturbed. If they ask about the collar, she will say Mr. Wolfe has it until tomorrow. If anyone comes to the door without Mrs. Biltmore, she will ask them to return at 7. Edna listened like a drill sergeant being told parade order. She said, "Yes, sir," in a way that always makes Wolfe forgive mankind for having throats. At 1, I took a cab uptown to the townhouse on an errand Wolfe called ornamental. The freesia had tired. I purchased their replacement myself. Same stems, same white, and left them in the morning room arranged badly. The dish of pins I rotated 3 degrees. Then I sat in the front room for 20 minutes, pretending to be a chair while Edna did not dust. No one came, which is an event when you're waiting for events. I left her with my card and a reminder that rest meant rest, even for a woman whose gift was apologizing. At 2:30, Kitson made his call. Saul watched him hang up, and watched him say 3 words. 6. He knows. To a man who pretended to read a menu and then went downstairs to a bank of payphones to pretend some more. It was pleasant to think of Fenton's jaw, but I restrained myself. At 3, Dr. Veen telephoned to request a further specification of household equilibrium. Wolfe provided it with 3 syllables, permission gradients, and let the silence work. Veen said, "Very good," which from him belonged on a medal. At 4, I walked to Lurie's for one last morsel. He had cleaned the clasp the way priests polish chalices and wanted me to know something about the tooth. If you knew the trick, you could open it blind by pressing a hair left of center and then sliding up, not down. Ava had known. Lydia had not cared. Fenton had manhandled. Clara had avoided. It wasn't proof of anything except the shape of their fingers. Sometimes that's enough. At 5 on the dot, Kitson telephoned from the florist's alcove. 2, he said. Sister at 4:49. Paused long enough to read the card on the ranunculus. Smoothed the ribbon on the basket on the right. Partner at 4:57. Slowed. Didn't stop. Pinched the crease on his hat. And looked at your window like it owed him a nod. Hands. She used left to smooth. He used right to pinch. The designer came at 5:03, looked, smiled, did not touch. She looked up at the brownstone as if counting bricks. "Thank you," I said. "You're a marvel." "I'm a man who prefers quiet employers," he said, and hung up. I put the report on Wolfe's desk. He let it soak for a minute before speaking. "Mr. Fenton, habitual compulsion to correct the world without permission. Right hand, Miss Biltmore. Compulsion moderated by propriety. Left, Miss Sloane. Compulsion that stops at surfaces. Good. Now we arrange their arrivals. He didn't need to. The notes had done that. Fenton came early and sat on his folder like it was a raft. Lydia arrived exactly with the clocks, gloves resentful at having to be hands. Ava drifted in 1 minute late with the sketch I'd asked, the first version of the velvet setting with a scribble in the margin. Clara laughs. Too much. Crossed out and rewritten. Clara sparkles. Too much. I'm a man who believes in evidence, but a cross-out in a designer's hand can be worth a confession if you understand what a pencil erases. I checked the office before. Clara's 9 o'clock entrance. Fritz's olive bowl under gauze held its faint whisper of yesterday's lilac. The black velvet square bore the collar, closed and self-satisfied. The seed pearl stayed in its glassine on the far corner, a small moon we'd borrowed to make a tide. Wolfe had me put a blank card on the center of his desk, weighted by my pen. He told me where to stand and where not to stand, then shut his eyes and listened to the building as if it were a man with lungs. At 5 to 9 the phone rang. Saul. Banker stepped into a booth, called your number, hung up after one ring. Testing whether you're here. 10 seconds later, Sister used her lobby phone to call the house. Edna answered, said your line's busy. Sister hung up without thanks. They are taught, I told Wolfe. Good, he said. People pluck strings when they're taught. When they do, you hear the note they think they're hiding. At 9, the bell rang. I opened. Clara came in with her chin steady, and I won't pretend I didn't like her for it. She took the chair I put for her and saw the others in the periphery. She didn't flinch. I shut the door, set the chain, and the brownstone became a stage. Wolfe opened his eyes. Madam, he said to Clara, your house has been rehearsed. Tonight we stop the performance. I will say what happened and why, and then I will tell you how to end it. You may then decide whether to be grateful or angry. Either will be legitimate. Fenton's breath did a little hoarse snort. Lydia's fingers lay still on her lap like disciplined veils. Ava looked at the blank card on the desk and then at Clara's hands. Fritz stood in the doorway with the dignity of a velvet rope. Saul was a shadow 2 buildings away. Kitson, who had been bought for the afternoon by 2 kinds of silence, watched the florist's window for the twitch of a ribbon that would never again be satisfied by any hand but the owner's. First, Wolfe said, the collar did not grow legs. Miss Sloane carried it to Mr. Lurie with more kindness than wisdom. While it was gone, a voice authorized its repair from the house telephone. The voice sounded like Edna because it was trained to. That voice belonged to Miss Biltmore, and she used it to keep her sister-in-law in the pose of petition. Meanwhile, Mr. Fenton had his man watch and report so he could measure the widow's movements and keep the leash short. When the collar returned, a scent returned that had been banished, not to comfort, but to demonstrate. When I was entered last night, a seed pearl was left to declare mastery. It was counterfeit. The master is not a master. He is a meddler with a budget. He shifted his eyes. You each share a part. Tonight I will assign shares. He folded his hands and let the silence come to heel. The collar gleamed. The card sat, waiting for a hand to crease it. No hand moved. I thought of the pins aligned at 12, of the freesia rotated, of the ladle 1 hook left, of the seed that wasn't, and of Clara telling the furniture she wouldn't be afraid in that room. Wolfe breathed once, deep and slow, the way he does when the last piece has found the space he built for it, while the rest of us were introducing ourselves. Now, he said, and if you've never heard Wolfe say it in that tone, you've never sat in a room about to be rearranged without a finger touching a thing. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He never does. He let it unroll, heavy as velvet, until each word carried more weight than the pearls on the collar. "Mrs. Biltmore," he began, "the intrusions upon your peace were not acts of theft. They were rehearsals of power. A collar vanishing and returning, a note folded and discarded, a scent revived, a pearl displaced. None of these sought your property. They sought your posture. They were arranged to remind you that you were once pliant, dependent, and grateful for direction. The architect of that reminder sits before you." Clara's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. Wolfe's eyes, narrow and cold, moved to Lydia. "Miss Biltmore, it was you. You authorized the repair of the collar by imitating your maid's voice, certain no one would question the authority of a household servant. You reintroduced lilac, knowing your sister-in-law would associate it with the years when her husband's will and your advice controlled her. You folded a note into her room and left it blank, as if to say, 'You need not write your own decisions. I will crease them for you.' And when she began to waver, you tried it here, on me. A seed pearl, poorly chosen, left on my desk. But unlike your brother's widow, I do not defer." Lydia's chin lifted as if she could refuse the weight of the words. Her lips formed the beginning of a denial, but Wolfe cut her with a glance. "You did not act alone. Mr. Fenton supplied muscle and observation. He placed Kitson across the street to watch, to telephone, to reassure you that your experiment succeeded. You would have kept Mrs. Biltmore asking forever, asking for signatures, for allowances, for indulgence. A widow turned into a supplicant is convenient for a banker and satisfying for a sister who cannot forgive being displaced." Fenton's red face darkened further. "That's interpretation, Wolfe, not evidence." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "Evidence is not always a knife with blood on it. Sometimes it is a habit repeated until it betrays its owner. You straighten frames, you adjust hats, you correct what you touch. Miss Biltmore creases paper, even as she denies it. Your man reported each gesture from the florist's window. You cannot help yourselves. You arranged her life as you arrange objects in a room. Wolfe, let that sit." Ava Sloane spoke first. "And me?" she asked softly. "What part is mine?" "You abetted, but without malice," Wolfe said. "You took the collar to Lurie to please her, yes, but also to keep her tethered to gratitude. You wanted her to lean, not because you despised her freedom, but because you wished her attention. That was indulgence, not cruelty. You have already confessed it." Ava lowered her eyes. Clara turned toward her, a flicker of something between pity and release crossing her face. "Dr. Vane will confirm tomorrow what I already state tonight," Wolfe went on, "that this campaign was not designed to kill you, Mrs. Biltmore, nor to rob you, but to reduce you. It was a pedagogy of weakness. I have spoiled the lesson. You need not ask permission for your air, nor for your scent, nor for your ornaments. If you wish sandalwood, wear sandalwood. If you wish to discard pearls, discard them. If you wish to sign, sign. If you wish to refuse, refuse. If you cannot, then they have won already." Clara's voice, steady now, filled the pause. "I can." Wolfe inclined his head, satisfied. "Mr. Goodwin will provide Mr. Kitson's report to the police if Mr. Fenton or Miss Biltmore ever again presume to meddle. They will not. Mr. Fenton will explain to his bank that surveillance of clients is bad for dividends. Miss Biltmore will discover that her authority ends at her gloves. Miss Sloane may discover whether friendship is stronger without dependence. That concludes it." No one moved. Then Lydia rose, stiff as marble, and left without asking permission. Fenton followed, muttering like a furnace with no fire. Ava touched Clara's hand before going. Clara remained seated until the door shut and the chain fell back. She turned to Wolfe. "You've given me back my room," she said quietly. "That was the theft, wasn't it?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "A room, not yours, but theirs. It belongs to you again." She stood, gathered the velvet case, and inclined her head, not gratitude exactly, not yet, but something near respect. Fritz escorted her out. The silence after was deep and civilized. Wolfe lifted the collar with 2 fingers, dropped it into the case, and closed the lid. "Archie," he said, "dispose of it tomorrow. If she insists on wearing shackles, let them be invisible ones." "Sure," I said. "I'll ask her which kind of freedom she wants, the scented or the unscented variety." He closed his eyes. "Do not ask. State, no woman should require my permission for liberty." That was as close as Wolfe gets to a sermon. Dinner followed, lamb with rosemary, trout for variety. Wolfe ate. Fritz smiled at his plates, and I poured myself a beer, and thought of Clara Biltmore walking into her dressing room tomorrow with her head a fraction higher than yesterday. The pins might be out of line again, but this time, maybe, she wouldn't let anyone else move them back. That's how Nero Wolfe closed the case of the phantom dog collar. Not with handcuffs, not with headlines, but with a woman reclaiming the right to fasten or unfasten her own clasp. And as I put it in my notebook later, that night the moral was simple. If you let someone else arrange your life, don't be surprised when they prefer the furniture where you don't.